Are you ready?
Yeah. They all know how I feel when I'm trying to herd cats. I'm not sure
We're
I know
late.
the language.
We're late getting started because of the security meeting, but if everybody will take their seats. Madam Chair.
You're throwing David Savage under the bus.
What I was thinking. Yep.
I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:15 a.m. I'd like to ask as a courtesy to all that you ensure that you silence your cell phone. Each director received notice of this committee meeting. The public notice was properly posted as required by law. Director Tracy LaChance indicated that she would not be present for this meeting. Therefore, I, as vice chair, will sit in. All other directors are present. At this point in the meeting, we have set aside time to hear from you, the general public, those of you that were interested in providing comments and filled out one of the cards available at the reception desk are called on at this time to speak. Seeing that no one wishes to speak, we'll move forward with the agenda. Item 1 on the agenda is a discussion and possible action to declare. Item 1 on the agenda is discussion and possible action to declare surplus and convey to the city of Graham for public purposes real property owned by the Brazos River Authority in Young County, Texas. Will be presented by Randall McCartney, Regional Lake Operations Manager. Mr. McCartney?
Good morning. How are y'all today?
Good morning, sir.
So, as mentioned, this is the property that the Brazos River currently owns up on the northern end of Possum Kingdom Reservoir, just west of the city of Graham that we'll be discussing today. Potential conveyance of these tracts to the city was discussed back in November, if y'all remember. And the Property Management Committee at that point in time, at the end of the presentation, had directed the staff to move forward and try to get more details on the proposed conveyance to the city. And with that being said, we moved forward and went and had a meeting with the city back in February of this year. And with us today, I have Mr. Eric Garrity. He is the city manager from the city of Graham. So thank you for coming today. He'll be here to answer any questions that are directly related to the city's plans moving forward. As you can see here, these tracts are the ones that we're proposing to convey to the city of Graham. It's roughly 175 acres in total. One of the things I wanted to bring your attention to on this slide here is if you can see at the top of the screen, where's my laser? Is the laser not working? There it is. Right up here, that's Fireman's Park. For those that are unaware of that location, that's up on the northern end. And those ball fields here, just a minute, you'll be able to see why I pointed those out. And then down at the bottom on the southern end is the city of Graham's wastewater treatment plant. Those will be indicators here in just a minute on this next slide when I move forward to show you what this creek does along the way. Some of the evaluations that we took into place when we met with the city, we talked about different factors dealing from operational necessity, easements, flood inundation, water quality, and then we allowed the city to kind of come in and say, hey, this is what we would like to do with the property moving forward. Here's how we're going to utilize that. So as we move forward, I'll show you some of the things that we've talked about. Again, over on the left side here, at the top left, those are those ball fields. And this is not a catastrophic flood or anything like this. This is just a normal flood. So this property does get inundated with floods. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago with the rain that we've had, These photos are older, however, that same park was inundated with water. To the top right is the wastewater treatment plant that I brought your attention to earlier. And just for purposes in between those two locations, those pictures on the bottom are kind of how that creek comes out of its banks during a normal flood operation. Again, this is the FEMA map that kind of depicts the zones of flooding that those tracks are located in. They're all within the 100-year floodplain. And again, it just kind of depends upon the weather, the climate, as to how often this does flood. But it doesn't take much for that to get out of its banks. The city also owns both sides of the property. So basically, the Brazos River Authority is only involved in what's in the creek itself. With that being said, we do get from time to time some illegal dumping and things where our staff has to go out and remedy those problems. We have to remove them, which causes man hours and labor, and also how do we dispose of those depending upon what it is that they pick up. If it's hazardous waste, that takes extra steps obviously to dispose of that. During that meeting back in February when we met, we talked about a few of these topics here. The city would be responsible for the survey of the properties and the closing costs. We'll retain restrictions and reservations that we need to be operationally sound with the Brazos River Authority. We've looked at the floodplain, public recreation, and natural resource areas, natural use areas, and what they plan to do, the city, if this property is conveyed to them, they will use it for just a public use area. It'll be a natural resource area, hike and bike trails, those kinds of things. We would still own and retain the mineral rights. We would also reserve a perpetual inundation easement to where our mission, that was the one thing that was critical to our mission, is that we would be able to flood that area still if needed, and we would retain that. The deed would include automatic reverter clause. I think some back in November may have had concerns about some of the things that would come out of that, and here's a few of those. So the property would automatically revert back to the Brazos River Authority if the property ceased to be owned by the city, if the property was used for any other purposes other than public recreation or natural areas, including those listed, if any of the enclosed buildings were walled or structured or habitable, we wouldn't allow that. It would come back to the Brazos River Authority because obviously it's in a flood zone. If any city services were located on those tracks other than what was necessary to perform maintenance for those recreational areas. And obviously the last one here that we have listed is if any above ground utilities are placed on the tracks that we've proposed. We've had our internal council take a look at this. They've agreed to the terms, they've agreed to the reverter clauses, and so I think we've done our due diligence on trying to bring back some of the details that we're trying to get to where this property would be more advantageous to the city in their use by us. And I think that it would reduce risk, it would reduce liability for the Brazos River Authority, and it would reduce potential man hours during certain times with illegal dumping and things of that nature. With that being said, if y'all have any questions for me in reference to this, I know that y'all have seen this back in November, but we wanted to bring it back to you today. Yes, sir.
I have a question about that. The city council approved that they are ready to take over this property?
Yes, if Eric, if you want to come up and speak on that, but yes, sir, they have already approved to be willing to take on the conveyance
All
of this
members
property.
approved it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And also, city cannot convey this property to anybody else. I might have missed that.
Yes,
City
no,
can-
sir. They can't give it to anyone. If it leaves the city's control, it reverts back to the Brazos River Authority.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Some of us couldn't hear the questions. Could you repeat them?
Yes, he had asked if the city council had already approved for the conveyance of this property, and he had also asked if anybody else were to purchase the property from the city, would it revert back to the Brazos River Authority? And one of the things I may have failed to mention earlier is that again, the city owns both sides of this creek. Therefore, it's going to be very landlocked, if you will. And so it would be next to impossible to have someone build something there that would be of value because it floods quite regularly.
Other questions?
Will you go back to your FEMA map for me? I just want to know the data. What is the date of that FEMA map? You know?
No, I do not know. It's fairly recent, but I'd have to go back and get the actual date for you. I can do that if you'd like.
I'm just curious what it is. And I'm curious because I'm interested to know if we think that the floodplain would widen there ever. Not that it's going to impact our land or what's being conveyed, but what's the purpose of conveying this? Is it for maintenance, for like more baseball fields? Because I like baseball fields, but why now and why these properties?
Well, so back or initially, at the direction of the Property Management Committee, the BRA staff had begun to evaluate select Brazos River Authority properties. And so that's why we had justified these properties, because they were outlying properties and that they are pretty much landlocked, if you will, and they're also within the floodplain. So there's not much use for us either with those properties other than to flood it. And as long as we retain those rights to be able to have an inundation to flood those, it checks our mission. It checks the box for our mission.
And
Why don't you let Eric talk a little
Sure.
bit about what the city's gonna do with it?
Sure.
that's a great idea. Is that okay with you, Mr. Chairman?
We've got a couple of questions up here, and I think that Cynthia has a statement.
I don't have a question, but I just want to comment that several months ago when this agenda item was brought to the committee, there were a lot of questions about the why.
Yes, ma'am.
And so number one, thank you for answering a lot of those questions on your presentation. But more importantly, I think it meets the mission, but it really is an opportunity for the BRA to be a good neighbor to the city of Graham. It floods. It's not going to do anything for us. But more importantly, they are able to use it in the interim. And the BRA retains all of the rights that we need to for the purposes of the BRA. So I will go ahead and let the city of Graham talk, but I just wanted to make comment that I appreciated them answering those questions that we had on the floor last time. Thank you.
Before we go on, let me ask one other question on the inundation easement. I'm assuming that would contain a hold harmless. We saw just a moment ago the picture where we were flooding the baseball fields, and I want to be sure that the BRA wouldn't be responsible for cleaning up those fields or anything like that.
No, sir. Our attorneys have assured us that there's a hold harmless clause in there. We'll be taken care of on that.
Very good.
And to answer your question on the map, it was 2011.
Thank you very much. Other questions before we hear from Eric? Yes, sir.
Just one question on the item 5 of the, so what's the rationale in distinguishing above ground utilities versus simply utilities that would include above and below ground?
I'll let you stand.
So, we've been working this, excuse me. It's a pleasure to appear before the board. We've been working this area for several years now. There was a previous floodplain management action that took place. There are existing underground utilities. You notice the location of the wastewater treatment plant. There are certain underground utilities that cross Salt Creek, which bisects the area. And so above ground utilities obviously are more susceptible to the flooding, whereas underground aren't, and we have the need to have some underground utilities to connect to that wastewater treatment plant. Did that answer?
I think that answers the question. I guess, is there any concern from us, from a legal perspective, if there's a future underground utility that's installed, what recourse we would have in that decision for, just say it's a gas pipeline or some other underground utility that decides that that corridor is needed for access? Who decides?
I think that's a valid question.
So in my experience with utilities, remember you're dealing with multiple utility agencies. For example, gas is controlled by the Texas Railroad Commission. So that would be a negotiation between BRA and Texas Railroad Commission. For us, it's primarily water and sewer. And if we want to do this, and this was in here, we've done it before, we would come back and say, we have a need to place this underground utility in this location. What impact do you feel it would have? And BRA, because of this agreement, would have the ultimate accept or reject authority. But what usually happens is we work out a compromise. Well, can you move it here, or can you do it this way or that way? And we get it done. But BRA would have the ultimate refusal authority if we wanted to run another underground utility through this area.
Other questions? If there are no other questions, why don't you read the resolution?
Yes, sir. Be it hereby resolved that the Property Management Committee recommends to the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority adoption of the following proposed resolution. Whereas staff have developed, with approval from the Property Management Committee, a systematic methodology and a process for internally evaluating real property owned by the Brazos River Authority to determine the best use of such real property and its applicability to the mission of the Brazos River Authority. Whereas staff have evaluated the following tracts totaling approximately 175 acres, which are located north of Possum Kingdom Reservoir on the west side of the city of Graham in Young County, Texas. PK 0259, tract ID 81-3-42, approximately 117 acres. PK 0039, tract ID 167-3-43, approximately 2 acres. And PK 0036 and PK 0371, tract ID 80-3-42, approximately 56 acres. Whereas the City of Graham desires the Brazos River Authority to convey the tracts to the City of Graham to be maintained by the City of Graham for environmental and public recreational purposes in the area. Whereas based upon the evaluation, staff has determined there is no reasonably foreseeable need applicable to the mission of the Brazos River Authority to maintain ownership of the tracts, and that conveying the tracts to the City of Graham to be maintained by the City of Graham for environmental and public recreational purposes will serve the greater interest of both the Brazos River Authority and the City of Graham in regards to the use of the tracts. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager / CEO to negotiate and execute an agreement upon terms determined acceptable to the Brazos River Authority for the conveyance of the tracts to the City of Graham for so long as the City of Graham maintains ownership of the tracts and only utilizes the tracts for environmental and public recreational purposes.
I'll make clear to this committee that when we say that we're going to entertain the motion, that really all we're doing is recommending to the Board of Directors this action. It'll come before the board again for a full vote and a final vote. So you've heard a reading of resolution. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Motion's made by Director Savage,
I'll second.
second by Director Flores. Would you poll the board?
Vice Chairman Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Boren,
Yes.
That was boring. Boring? He's not here. Not here.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Weldon,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Lloyd.
Yes.
The motion carries, and we'll recommend it to the full Board of Directors. At this time, there's no other business for the committee. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion's been made by Mr. Director Huber, second by Director Savage. All in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 9:35.